And now we have a presentation by Qiqi Yang from Princeton University. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Qiqi. I'm excited to share my work about global spread of avian influenza. Specifically, I will focus on how bird migration contributes to the dispersal of the disease and what it tells us about vulnerable bird orders. I'm sure I don't have to introduce influenza to this audience. Today's talk, I will focus on highly pathogenic avian influenza virus, HPAIV. It has same genomic structure as flu virus, as shown in this figure. It's very deadly to the farm poultry, causing economic loss in poultry farming industry, and it has spilled over from poultry to humans. Through gene assortments, possibly using swine as a mixing vessel, it can also contribute a new pandemic virus in humans, posing public health threats. Wild birds are thought to be natural hosts of avian influenza. They get infected but don't show much symptoms. For recent years, there's a new variant emerged through spillover and spillback from bird and poultry, and it's caused mass mortality in wild birds, reducing the bird biodiversity. And it's going to be the focus of our talk today. So the variant is called Clade 2344. It emerged in 2010 and started to cause higher magnitude of outbreaks and in fact, wider range of avian hosts since 2014. So what are the ecological evolutionary processes underlying the unique epidemiological pattern? One important aspect of the pattern is the spatial dispersal pattern of the virus. People hypothesize there are two possible ecological mechanisms, live poultry trade and wild bird migration. One of my previous work found within China, the live poultry trade network shapes the avian influenza transmission network. And what about the global scale? If we simply overlay the bird migration flyways with the avian influenza outbreak points, as shown in this map, we see there are many overlaps. But how can we quantify this possible association? And does the live poultry trade contribute to the global dispersal of the virus as well? So this is our first question. The challenges to study this question lie in two aspects. First, it's difficult to integrate host movement, majorly because insufficient bird movement data, and HPAIV, the disease prevalence data, is also lacking because of passive reporting in wild birds and very localized surveillance. So we want a global surveillance of avian influenza to address this challenge, but also to address the problem of avian influenza outbreaks. To design such effective surveillance strategies, we need to identify vulnerable avian species as well as high-risk geographical regions where these species get exposed to the virus. So we design our research by using virus genomic data to construct a virus transmission network, and we use bird tracking data to construct a bird migration network. And we use statistical method to see the contribution of bird migration to the virus transmission. We use the same bird tracking data set along with other ecological variables to infer the species distribution of different bird orders. And we can summarize the distribution probability of different bird orders at a region and destination location in the network. And we can see how it changes in a year. Similarly, we can summarize the virus lineage movement from the origin to the destination location on the same route. And again, we can use statistical method to see the association between these two. So we used over 1,800 hemagglutinin gene sequences from poultry and wild birds. You can see there is a geographical sampling bias from this map, which I'll talk about later in the results. But the data, the sequence data has a very strong evolutionary signal, which means we can use this sequence data to infer the phylogeny and test our hypothesis. We use a method called discrete traits phylogeography developed by my collaborator, Philip Lamy. The basic idea is when we infer the coalescent-based phylogeny, we also infer the diffusion of traits A, B, C, D. In our case, the traits are the locations of virus samples. I won't go into details because of time, but happy to talk about this later. So this is our phylogeography. It shows all the viruses are highly clustered according to different regions colored here. And there's also little virus lineage movement between different aggregated geographical regions. It tells us the interregional virus introduction might occur at very low frequency, and the viruses might persist within a region after the introduction for a while. On the other hand, we use bird tracking data from a database called MoveBank to construct a directed binary networks for bird migration and spring bird migration. So the edges in this network tells us if there's any bird migration observed between these aggregated regions. We also reconstruct a live poultry tree network based on the trait value data. So these networks serve as predictors of the generalized linear model, which we use to fit the diffusion rates between these locations. So this model also can tell us the inclusion probability of these networks to the diffusion rate matrix between these locations, and also the effect size of these predictors. Again, I'm happy to talk about the details later. We combine the fall migration network and spring migration network of birds into a seasonally changing network. And we also model the evolutionary process of the viruses as a seasonally changing process. We found the seasonally changing wild bird migration network is a major contributor to the virus evolutionary process and the lineage movement between the locations. And can see the effect size as around 2. The mean effect size is around 2 at the log scale, and it has 100% inclusion probability in blue, which is a clade 2344. Although the other clade 2321 is not focus of today's talk, it also shows the similar pattern. And you can see in comparison, live poultry tree network has much smaller effect size as well as smaller inclusion probability lower than 50%. We can further break down the virus lineage movements into different routes and different times of the year. And if we plot this relative frequency of the virus lineage movements in a year using different bird annual cycle phase, we can see that the virus lineage movement from south to north usually peak during the spring migration season and the wintering period of birds. In comparison, the southward virus lineage movements usually peak during the fall migration of birds. I didn't show the absolute frequency here, but the southward lineage movements of virus also have much higher absolute frequency than the virus moving from south to north, which means the southward virus lineage movement might have more important role in the global dispersal of avian influenza. Then we can break down this overlap between the virus lineage movement and the bird annual cycle phase into different bird orders so that we can answer our second question, which migratory bird orders might be exposed to the virus and where are they exposed to? So we replot the previous frequency histogram into a violin plot where the x-axis shows the time of the year and the y-axis shows the different virus lineage movement routes. and the width of the violin represents the relative frequency of the virus lineage movements. We calculate the correlation between virus lineage movements and bird distribution at a region location or destination location. We found 8 bird orders out of 9 are correlated with different routes of virus lineage movements. We call them vulnerable bird orders. And I want to highlight a few among these orders. First, sutiforms, for example, cormorants, their distribution at Europe and Qinghai are correlated with the virus lineage movements from Europe to Qinghai. Although it suggests it's related to the dispersal of the highly pathogenic avian influenza on this route. Although this conclusion is tentative because of undersampling of virus in the areas between these regions. There are a few bird orders associated with multiple virus lineage movements. Unsurprisingly, anceriforms, waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swines. Again, sutiforms, also shorebirds, characteriforms, cycloiforms, herons, egrets, vultures. All the birds we found associated with multiple routes are water birds. We can also use this to identify high-risk regions. There are 3 routes that we found are associated with multiple bird orders. There are Qinghai to Europe, South China to Southeast Asia, and Europe to Africa. So in addition to these conclusions, our work also provides a phytodynamic framework that links the bird movement ecology and genomic epidemiology of avian influenza. We can use this method to understand the ongoing outbreaks in wild birds, for example, as this photo shows in Dalmatian pelicans in grays, and with many improvements in many aspects of this work, as I mentioned before. I want to thank a lot of people who provide support and feedbacks to this work, and also the data contributors on MoveBank and on GIS8. Thank you for listening.
Excellent. We have time for at least one question.
Yeah, that was a really nice talk. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the interactions between wild bird and domestic bird and why you don't see any effect of domestic bird movement. Is it because the prevalence of the disease is lower, because they're culled before they're being moved, or just the kernel, the spatial kernel of the domestic bird is tighter?
I'm not sure if I hear that clearly, but are you talking about why there's lower spillover from wild birds to poultry? Or
yeah, so are the domestic birds kind of dead end host, and or if the disease is there, but perhaps they're killed before they're moved, or just the movements are shorter distances, and that's why you don't see.
The live poultry trade movements, they are more short distance than the wild birds. I think that's a interesting difference from the live poultry trade network from the wild bird migration network, where the poultry trade network seems more connected at within region scale. So I think it might explain the difference that when we look at within country dispersal of the high path avian flu that we found, like poultry trade network as a major contributor rather than the wild bird migration network within the country. But when we shift to the global scale, it seems the bird migration contributes much more. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on.